Here we have the earliest model of the Rolleicord. This is known as the Rolleicord I, oddly enough, or not oddly enough. It's also informally known as the Art Deco model. The Art Deco period really took place in the 20s and into the early 1930s, so this would be at the end of the Art Deco period. This is a very interesting camera in its design. You can see the different pattern that extends on the side to the side. The back is a little rough on this camera. Either side, even the buttons or even the knobs have that patterning. And then up to the focusing hood. This camera is in pretty decent shape, although I believe there were roughly 30,000 of these made. There aren't that many that survived. I'm not exactly sure what happened, but you know, things get thrown out, as you could say. So to open the hood, fairly simple procedure. Let's do that again. To open the hood, there's this small little piece right here. Simply pull back on that, pull it away from the front of the camera, and the hood will snap open like that. This camera's been overhauled. As I recall, most cameras take between 3 and 4 hours, so I'll say that this took between 3 and 4 hours. I believed I replaced the mirror in the assembly with a front focus, with a front surface mirror. By the way, for many years, you could find a replacement of the mirrors in those one-step Polaroid cameras that you could. I think it's one time you could buy them for like $4 or $5. They might be a bit more, but that's how I found a plentiful supply of mirrors for older twin lens cameras. Like all Rolleiflexes, this camera had its focusing knob on the right side. With a Rolleiflex, the focusing knob is on the left side, and you could see that it's a fairly small knob. These are roughly the same size. This was to hold your fresh roll of film. Where's the frame counter? Frame counter was right here, and this little button helped you reset your frame counter. Yes, you pulled it toward the corner of the camera. Oddly enough, these little lugs, I believe, went into your case. Usually they're a bit higher, although you do have 2 strap lugs here. Not surprisingly, this uses a very simple ground glass screen. There's no focusing aids. However, there is a magnifier, and the magnifier, there's a small tab. The magnifier lifts with this small tab that is right here, and it folds over, and then you can use this. It's interesting because you can use this to focus and then shift your eye down to actually see what you're taking a photo of. Otherwise, you would then have to retract the magnifier, and you do that by pulling the hood forward toward the front of the camera. You see that lift up, and you would ease that back into position. This also had what was called a sports finder. So to use the sports finder, you would then push this little panel that's part of the hood down until it locks into position. Then you would simply peer through this small square hole and frame your shot using the open frame in here. They called it a sports finder. The reason they called it a sports finder is because you could pre-focus the camera, and then without having to look down into the viewing screen, you would just peer through that little black square in the back. The reason that was preferable is because you could follow action. Let's say, for example, if a horse was running past, if a car was driving past you, or there was a bird or whatever, you could very quickly frame it. Is a twin lens camera, objects are laterally reversed, left to right. By the way, to return this little flap to its starting position, pull back on this part of the hood till it pops up. That's it. Very simple. And because objects are laterally reversed left to right, most people use this camera the first time. If they want to reframe their shot, they're going to move the camera in the wrong position. Once you train your brain to move the camera in the right position, it's not a problem. But for most of us, we're going to move it in the direction in which we believe makes sense, but it's actually the opposite. You'll see. Get a twin lens camera sometime and give it a shot. So using the camera was actually very simple. You really just focus. With all Rolleicords, you had to both tension the shutter and release the shutter with the same lever. I don't believe any Rolleicords had button release. I should check on that. So with the Rolleicord, you pull the shutter lever and then you push it to release. It's never the opposite. Pull and push to release. This was an older computer shutter, obviously, 1933, so they hadn't quite yet perfected the 1/500th of a second. So this had speeds running from 1/300th of a second down to 1 second plus B and T. Apertures were set using just the little pointer on the left. And so then you would just set your exposure. These days it is a bit easier because you can use an exposure meter. I believe there's also some apps for your phone for you to help set exposure. I haven't used them. I actually have plenty of exposure meters, as you might imagine, and so I just use a handheld exposure meter. Very simple. This had a provision for a cable release right here, and that was it. Of course, there might have been flash photography at the time, but it probably was that old style magnesium powder. I believe it was magnesium powder that they used for flash. So in that case, they probably would set a small aperture, set the shutter on B or T, open the shutter, light up that flash powder, and then close the shutter. Thank goodness we don't do that anymore. Okay, to change film, this is real simple. All you do here is you press this button and pull up on this bottom lever. And if you could hear it on snap. So you open the camera, and like all cameras, had a pressure plate, right? The object of the pressure plate, once again, is to hold the film flat against the film rails or flat against the film plane so that you would get as sharp a photo as possible. Generally, when you went to change film, you always had to move your empty take-up spool to the top. So pull out on the film advance knob, turn it until you feel it slip into position, if you heard that. Then you would take your fresh roll film. Here's an example. I'm not going to open it though. But you would take your fresh roll film, put it in here, take that paper leader and insert it into a slot in the film spool. Get a couple revolutions around there. Close your back. And then open the small red window. Then what you would do is you would wind until you saw a 1 show up. Once you saw the 1 show up, you would then reset your frame counter, pull that toward the back, and you're good to go. You can start shooting. Then every time you wanted to, when you were ready to move on to the next shot, should just be able to wind until you reach number 2. I can't recall if this one locks the film advance when it reaches number 2, or if you stop when it reaches 2 here when it's centered in the window. Just don't recall. I have shot with this camera. It's been a while, probably been about 10 years or so. This camera was in storage for a while. I can tell you it's a very well-made camera. Despite it being the first model and it being a Rolleicord. The Rolleicord were always thought as the slightly lesser sibling to the Rolleiflex. And with the Rolleicord, you never saw the top lenses on the Rolleicord. I believe the best lens that these ever came with were pretty much a Triatar, and then after the war, probably a Xenar, as the Rolleiflex line moved over to the planars. Let's take a look at the weight of this camera. 1 pound, 15.7 ounces. So I think it's safe to say that this camera itself is 2 pounds. Remember, this particular camera still has that roll of film that I stuck in there. So it's not an overly massive or overly heavy camera, and it's very simple to use. I'll show some photos that I took with this camera. As you might expect, with Triatar, you're only going to get so much performance out of a Triatar. You're going to get decent performance, but it's not the same as a Tessar. Triatar, of course, means it's a 3-element lens, with tri meaning 3, of course. When I got this camera, I'd seen other photos of different Rolleicord I cameras on the market, and I thought, well, take a look at this. But I quickly dispensed with any thought of using this exposure guide. That, and coupled with the fact, I believe, let me take a quick look. I believe the writing is Italian. I'm not positive, but it's not French and it's not German and it's certainly not English. Yes, I believe that's Italian writing. Somebody out there probably knows better than me and probably can say whether what language this is in. Regardless, I think the main difficulty was the fact that it's very worn on the back. This camera actually does have a gold tint to it. I think it's more brass than gold, and it's a very striking camera. How is it to use? Surprisingly simple to use, aside from the fact you have to set your shutter speed and your apertures manually. It is a surprisingly easy camera to use. Like the other Rolleicords, it's a bit different than a Rolleiflex. Not terribly different, but it is a little bit different. There is some slight cloudiness to the lens, but for a lens that was at that time, let me see, I bought this around 2005 or 7. So at that point, it was probably 70, 72, 74 years old. And so it wasn't in bad shape, and so with a lens that old, you have to just accept what it is at that point. The camera was pretty grimy underneath, and I had to remove this front plate and the shutter. I serviced the shutter, and once properly serviced, these shutters can run for a long time correctly. Obviously, this is an uncoated lens. Occasionally, you will see sort of sometimes like a almost iridescent reflection, and that is sometimes, I think that's been called blooming. And it's a natural process that occurs with uncoated glass, and it can act as a sort of like a natural lens coating. It certainly isn't effective as a true lens coating, but it does help. So this is it. This is the Rolleicord I, the Art Deco model. This is the first Rolleicord produced by Franken Heidecke in Braunschweig, Germany. At some point, I'll show you an early model of the Rolleiflex. I don't have the first model. I think I have the second model. But it will be nice to show off that model, and then I'll just bring this one back as a quick comparison to it. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. And if you'd like to see me cover a particular camera in the future, please let me know in the comments below or drop me a note at contact@camera-talk.net. Until then, keep on taking photographs.